For decades, Hollywood has sold you the myth of rugged cowboys, single-handedly taming the wild frontier with 6 shooters and steel nerves. But the truth is that real cowboys were mostly broke, illiterate teenagers who spent their days shoveling manure and getting trampled by cattle, while the actual taming of the West was done by railroad companies, the US Army, and Eastern businessmen who never set foot on a ranch. The cowboy era lasted barely 20 years, and during that brief window, these underpaid ranch hands had about as much control over the frontier as a janitor has over a skyscraper. They were just there to clean up the mess. Tonight, we'll follow the real story of how the West was actually won, from the corporate boardrooms of New York to the military forts that did the real work, and by the end, you'll discover why the cowboy myth was deliberately created to hide the one dark truth about Western expansion that would have horrified Americans if they'd known at the time. So settle in and prepare to learn why the most famous symbol of American independence was actually just a marketing lie deigned to cover up the biggest land grab in human history. But like many powerful myths, it is a story that is more beautiful than it is true. The reality of the Wild West was far more complex and nuanced than the simplified narratives we often see. It was a time of hardship, conflict, and moral ambiguity. It is a story designed to make us feel a certain way, to believe in a certain kind of past. A past where good always triumphs over evil, where heroes are always virtuous, and where the landscape is always breathtaking. It's a romanticized vision that often obscures the less palatable aspects of history. Tonight, let us gently pull back the curtain on this story. Let's take a closer look at the realities behind the myth, exploring the complexities and contradictions that shaped the American West. Let us explore the quieter, sleepier truth about the American West. Beyond the gunfights and the cattle drives, there was a world of everyday life, of families struggling to survive, of communities building a new society from the ground up. This popular image was carefully crafted, not on the dusty plains, where life was often a brutal struggle for survival, but in the studios of Hollywood, where dreams were manufactured and legends were born. The magic of cinema transformed the West into a land of endless possibilities. Early filmmakers saw the West as a grand stage. It was a blank canvas on which they could paint stories of heroism and adventure, unburdened by the constraints of historical accuracy. They were creating a new mythology for a new nation. They created a character who was easy to understand and easy to admire. A figure who embodied the values of courage, integrity, and self-reliance. He was the perfect hero for a nation seeking to define itself. The cinematic cowboy was always his own man. Free from the constraints of society, he lived by his own code, making his own rules. He was the ultimate individualist, a symbol of American freedom. He answered to no one. He was a lone wolf, beholden only to his own conscience. This image of unwavering independence has captivated audiences for generations, solidifying the cowboy's place in our cultural imagination. The real cowboy was not a hero. He was a worker. His job was difficult, dirty, and often monotonous. For most of the year, he was a farmhand on horseback. His primary task was to move cattle from one place to another. These were the great cattle drives, journeys that could last for months and cover more than 1,000 miles. The cowboy's life was one of constant motion, governed by the needs of the herd. He spent long hours in the saddle, in all kinds of weather. He faced blistering heat, sudden storms. If any single thing could be said to have conquered the West, it was not a man on a horse. It was the locomotive. The railroad was the true engine of change on the American frontier. Before the railroad, the West was a vast and inaccessible territory. It took months to cross by wagon, a dangerous and uncertain journey. The railroad changed everything. It cut the travel time from months to days. It connected the resource-rich lands of the West with the industrial cities and hungry markets of the East. The rhythmic clatter of its wheels was the sound of a new era arriving. The railroad companies were immensely powerful. Alongside the railroad, another powerful institution was at work, quietly and methodically shaping the West. This was the United States Army. While Hollywood movies often show the cavalry arriving at the last minute to save the day, the Army's role was far more systematic and less dramatic. Its primary mission was not to fight glorious battles, but to make the West safe for settlement and for the construction of the railroads. The Army was the enforcer of the government's policy of expansion. It was the institution that cleared the path for the settlers and the railroad tracks that followed. The Army's main task was to manage and control the Native American tribes who had lived on the land for centuries. As settlers and railroads pushed westward, behind the railroads and the Army stood another group of powerful men. These were the Eastern businessmen, the bankers. They were the ones who truly financed the transformation of the West. They sat in boardrooms in New York, making decisions that would shape the lives of millions of people they would never meet. They saw the West not as a land of romance and adventure, but as a storehouse of valuable resources. It was, a place to be developed, exploited, and turned into profit. These men were the invisible hand guiding the fate of the frontier. They invested in the railroads, providing the massive amounts of capital needed to lay thousands of miles of track. We cannot speak of the settling of the West without acknowledging the people who were already there. For thousands of years, the plains were home to hundreds of distinct Native American nations. They had their own complex societies and their own deep spiritual connection to the land. The story of westward expansion is also their story. It is the story of their displacement and the destruction of their way of life. This is perhaps the most uncomfortable truth that the cowboy myth helps to conceal. It is a slow and deeply sorrowful part of the tale. So if the real cowboy was often a low-paid temporary laborer, facing harsh conditions and economic uncertainty, toiling away in relative obscurity, and if the real forces shaping the West were large corporations, government policies, and the relentless march of industrial progress, far removed from the romantic image. Why then did the cowboy, this figure so divorced from reality, become such a powerful and enduring American symbol? What explains this transformation? Why did this particular figure, seemingly a relic of a bygone era, capture the nation's imagination so completely, embedding itself in the American psyche? What was it about the cowboy that resonated so deeply? The answer, as is often the case with cultural phenomena, lies in the timing, in the specific historical context in which the cowboy myth took root. The myth of the cowboy, that idealized image of rugged individualism and freedom, began to grow and solidify just as the real cowboy era was drawing to a close, fading into the sunset. As the frontier was officially declared closed, America began to feel a profound sense of nostalgia, a longing for a past that was already slipping away, becoming a distant memory. The romanticized West offered an escape from the present. As the 19th century rapidly transitioned into the 20th, America was undergoing a dramatic transformation, becoming an increasingly urban, industrial, and, some would say, bureaucratic nation, losing touch with its agrarian roots. Millions of people, lured by the promise of economic opportunity, were leaving their farms and rural communities to seek employment in the factories and industries of the burgeoning cities. They found themselves living in crowded, often unsanitary cities, working long hours for large, impersonal companies, feeling a sense of alienation and a loss of connection to the land. The cowboy, in stark contrast, offered a powerful and appealing antidote to these modern anxieties, representing a life of freedom, self-reliance, and connection to nature. Starting in the late 1880s, dime novels, cheap, sensational paperbacks that catered to the popular taste, began churning out thrilling tales of daring cowboy heroes, further fueling the myth and capturing the public's imagination. As our journey through the captivating landscapes and compelling narratives of the West comes to a close, the enduring image of the cowboy riding off into the sunset lingers in our minds. It's a scene etched in our collective memory, a symbol that resonates far beyond its literal depiction. We've explored the myths and realities, the triumphs and tragedies, and the quiet moments that define this iconic region. It is a powerful and enduring image, one that has been romanticized and reinterpreted countless times in literature, film, and art. It speaks to something fundamental within us, a yearning for adventure, independence, and a life lived on one's own terms. But what lies beneath the surface of this captivating symbol? It speaks to a deep human longing for freedom, for wide-open spaces where the spirit can roam unburdened by the constraints of civilization. It's a vision of limitless possibility, a place where dreams can take flight and anything seems achievable. The vastness of the landscape mirrors the boundless potential that we see within ourselves. And for a connection to the natural world, a sense of belonging to something larger than ourselves. The West, in its pristine beauty, offers a sanctuary from the artificiality of modern life. It reminds us of our primal connection to the earth, to the rhythms of nature, and to the simple joys of existence. But now, perhaps, after delving into the complexities of its history and the nuances of its present, we can see it with new eyes, with a more informed and critical perspective. We can move beyond the romanticized notions and grapple with the realities that have shaped this region. We can appreciate the beauty of the myth, the allure of the cowboy, and the promise of the open frontier, while also understanding the more complex reality that it conceals: the displacement of indigenous peoples, the exploitation of natural resources, and the struggles of ordinary people trying to make a life in a harsh and unforgiving environment. We can see the cowboy not as a demigod who tamed the West single-handedly, but as a real person, a working man caught in a period of immense and rapid change, facing challenges and making sacrifices just like anyone else. He was a product of his time, shaped by the forces of history and driven by the need to survive. The real legacy of the West is not found solely in the shootout at the OK Corral or in the romanticized tales of gunfighters and outlaws. It is written across the land itself, etched into the very fabric of the landscape. It's a story of transformation, of human impact, and of the enduring power of nature. It is in the grid of railroad lines that still crisscross the continent, a testament to the ambition and ingenuity that drove the westward expansion. These iron arteries connected distant communities, facilitated trade, and transformed the West into an integral part of the nation. It is in the fences that divide the plains into neat squares of private property, a visible manifestation of the concept of ownership and the transformation of the land into a commodity. These boundaries represent both opportunity and constraint, defining the limits of individual freedom and the realities of economic development. Understanding this quieter history, this more nuanced and multifaceted story, does not diminish the West or its significance. On the contrary, it enriches our understanding and makes it more real, more relevant, and more meaningful to our lives. And that is a story worth knowing in all its quiet and complex truth. A story that challenges our assumptions, expands our perspectives, and deepens our appreciation for the land and the people who have shaped it. It's a story that continues to unfold, with each new generation adding its own chapter to the ongoing saga of the American West.